Hello there. Hey, I'm putting together just a really quick little sort of improvisational prep session right now. So if you want to follow along, what this is a sort of negative strategy session for green card reform. And so a little bit of background. So what you're seeing on the screen is a flow sheet, basically, but I'm going to widen these out so I can do a little bit more. If you're unfamiliar with flow sheets, basically it is the affirmative, constructive, negative constructive, affirmative rebuttal, negative rebuttal, second affirmative rebuttal. These are each of the speeches of the debate, and we're probably only going to be focusing on these first two columns right now, but it's a way of kind of taking notes, and this is the electronic version, the best I can kind of do right now. Okay. All right. So first thing is we want to make sure that we know what our topic is. Yeah. So so this is the NFA-LD topic for immigration, and so let's take a look here. NFA-LD. So it's an immigration topic about statutory restrictions. Okay. So and when we're talking about green card reform, there is a plan that's been floated to change the total number of green cards per year from 140,000 to 170,000. That's what the plan would be. So if that is the extent of their plan, that's kind of what the green card reform case, that's where it starts from. Okay. Now before this last presidential election, there was another plan. I'll put that in parentheses right here. Okay. Where you know what, I'm going to just do it like that. It's just a little bit bigger, where it was to eliminate the 7% per country max. Now, if you don't know what that means, it's basically that each country within the immigration system, or each country that is represented by immigrants coming to the United States that want to get green cards, or green card applicants. I think I'm phrasing this poorly, but all of those countries, you have a 7% maximum of all the green cards allowed for the people of that country. The 7% maximum per country. So it doesn't matter how populous your country is, or how many applicants proportionally are coming from the country. It's just like 7% maximum. So the really, really small countries never reach that 7% maximum, but places like India and China regularly hit that. Now, in the first semester, we were doing this case where it was a 7% sort of elimination. But from my understanding, there was law that was just passed, and that's going to be implemented. And so if anyone has that as their inherency story, or as their plan text, that means that you have a way to do it, what's called an inherency press. Okay, so if somebody's doing this 7% thing, you could go out and say, you could say that this plan has already been passed. That means your inherency should no longer exist. That is a stock issue, and you should, at least you discount that one advantage or the argument or any sort of offensive reasons why you'd vote for them based off of that plan, because that plan is already passed. And so if somebody's already done that in their case, you can kind of point that out. You can be more current than them. This is something that's happened in the last couple of months. I mean, like we're at the end of March, beginning of May right now. And I think this happened like in January. Okay. So like debate is always current. It's always now. And so if you could find that evidence that says that the 7% maximum has already been cut, then if they were unaware of that or made that mistake, you can capitalize on it. Okay. So that's one thing that you can do just on a plan level. Okay. Now, more than likely, they have advantage one. Might be economy. Okay. That might be. And so if their first one is the economy, they more than likely they can point out that, oh yeah, we like the harms right now is that COVID hit us hard. And you would have evidence for that. You would cite evidence for that. All right. And now here's where the inherency is. So you notice I'm just using H and I as ways of kind of identifying it. All right. If you got any questions, anyone who's watching, you can ask questions and I should be able to answer them in real time. Okay. So right now, COVID hit us hard. You can find plenty of evidence for that. Right. And you could even say, this is where you get to tie in the immigration part of it. Okay. So green card, what was it? Decreased number of. Okay, this one might be a little bit of a stretch. That part of the reason that the economy is where it is because the number of green cards that we admitted went down. I think theoretically you could find plenty of information that would say that, but I don't know if that's what evidence you got there or anything like that. But you could also just say that there's like a number of like an alternate inherency might be along the lines of saying that there's gaps to fill during the recovery. So we should be entering the recovery of our economy right now. And so like we need to make sure that we have people so we don't fall behind in that one. Okay. So, and then you have solvency would be that this plan helps fill gaps. I don't know, something like that. And the impact, like why that is important. You can actually quantify like how much, but you could talk about how it like, builds a tax base and strengthens, I think I'm misspelling stuff, strengthens the economy. Now, these are all just sort of brainstorming things that you would fill in with actual evidence, okay? So there's your advantage on the economy. Now, if you're on the negative, you'd want to, if you want to do on-case arguments. And so, like, rather than going through the entire affirmative, like, you would do this again for like straight up backlog. That might even be your number one, right? Where there's a big old backlog for green card, and I'm not gonna sort of flush that out in the same way. But what I want to point you to is you can look at all of these arguments. And if you only look at them one by one, it's like, well, yeah, COVID did hit us hard. It's like, oh yeah, well, green cards did go down. You can admit that all those are factually true, but that the story that you're telling with them isn't as accurate or as genuine. Okay. And it's like, and so you can say, okay, I'm doing something. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm doing is like, okay, you're right. The economy's not doing good, and it's because of COVID. And you're right, green cards went down during COVID, but that doesn't mean that the decrease in green cards caused our economic meltdown. You see what I'm saying? It's like both of them are correlated by something else. And so if your affirmative is making that argument, like I said on there, you could point that out. That would be called an on-case argument. That would be just a straight up response to the logic that they're doing. Notice how nuanced it is, though, right? That you're not just saying that they are wrong in the sources that they cited. You're saying that they're wrong in the logic they are using to string together that story. Okay, and so that is a completely acceptable way to, and it's a fairly persuasive way to have a negative strategy. Okay, but you got to, the hard part is that you got to make that really clear, and then you can you can insert like another row, and you could add, and now you could open that up and make it even longer and longer. And it's like now you can have the opportunity to explain what the true cause was, right? So it's like, first, this, just because these two things happen in connection or at the same time doesn't mean that one caused the other, all right? That's a correlation, not a causation. Secondly, the cause of our economic meltdown is that, like, oil prices. It's not our tech sector, right? And so now you get to insert a piece of evidence. You say, according to The Economist, they made this analysis on why our economy is not going to ever get better unless we figure out oil prices. Your plan doesn't do that. Therefore, it's there. And then you could drop down and say that, because it's like the plan helps fill gaps, but that doesn't mean that it will fix the economy. Right, because that was the original goal. So sometimes people lose track of their story from their harms down to their solvency, and they like, if you're pointing out that the economy sucks right now, then your advantage should be explaining why you will in some way solve what sucks about the economy. And while this advantage attempts to do that, I think that you can kind of like wedge yourself in there and open it up, and that opens up opportunities for research. Okay, that you can go out and actually look for things like that. Okay. Same thing on the backlog. Now, the backlog, I want to actually, there's a couple of ways that you could do this. And so one of these ways is, let me back up a little bit. All these arguments that I'm putting in the second column, the red column, those are on-case arguments, right? That you can just kind of, that's just a way to refute. Now, a lot of people recognize that these arguments are defense. All right, that the affirmative on the green is trying to score points with their arguments, and your arguments are trying to prevent those points from happening. The cool part is that you can have one good argument and it blocks all of the points. That's good, right? But the bad part is it is still defense. You're not scoring your own points, okay? And so one way to actually score your own points is to what I would call off case. Okay, it's not what I call it. It's what everyone calls it. I'm sorry. It's like there's like a bunch of people call off case anything that's outside of that. And so one of the things about green card reform. Now this is kind of a beginner's argument. Okay, like there's a lot more. There's sophisticated ways to respond to this. There's easy ways to respond to this argument that I'm going to go over right now, but just want to let you know it's kind of a beginner's argument. And it's but that doesn't mean that it's easy. What I'm saying is that it's still kind of complicated, but it's not something that I think that a lot of senior debaters go for. Okay, now it's a topicality on the word substantial. Okay. Now, the first part of this argument is the hardest part. Okay, the first part is the counter definition. So if you're going to counter define this, let's you'd have to find evidence that would actually kind of help quantify what substantial means. Now, when you're talking, and because you want to apply it because of this particular case. Let's say it has to be greater than 50%. Substantial means that you have to, that there has to be a greater than 50% change in anything. Okay. Now the violation. So you're going to want to watch the topicality lecture video in order to figure out these things, but I don't want to get too off track. So the violation is that the plan is only a what is it? I think it's a 21. How can I say this as the most pretentious way possible? 21.4% change. What the hell am I talking about? I'm talking about your plan to increase from 140,000 to 170,000. That's a 30,000 difference, right? That's 21%. You're increasing it by just a little over 21% and saying that's substantial. And the thing is that here's the hidden strategy behind that. It's purposefully unsubstantial because you don't want to trigger a whole bunch of disadvantages. And so if you were really clever about this, I would talk about like what happens when you drastically increase the amount of green cards, that like increasing the number of green cards must be gradual. And then they come back and say it is gradual. You're like, yeah, right, because you're not topical. All right. Anyways, that's a little bit more advanced, but anyways. The plan only 21%. And so you could explain like all you're doing is raising the number of green cards by 30,000. That ain't substantial. And why is that important? Well, because the resolution that we are debating is that the United States federal government should implement immigration reform that removes substantial statutory restrictions. So if the statutory restriction is that we only have 130,000 green cards that we will dole out, then the removal of it needs to be substantial, right? It's like, so you have to raise it by a certain level in order to make it substantial. And then you say substantial statutory restrictions on legal immigration into the United States. So if you are restricted to only 130,000, therefore the removal of it needs to be you have to release at least half of it. That would mean 70,000. You didn't do that. So take a look. That's the violation. A standard. Here's a nice, easy standard. All words have meaning. It's a pretty simple one. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, they have the word substantial in there. It has to mean something. It can't just mean like, the affirmative gets to do whatever they want. And so I'm giving it a nice, there's another standard. I'm just going to use S now. ST because solvency. What was I saying? Oh, Brightline. So it gives a clear bright line about what is and is not topical. They could do more than that. I would always argue a standard of ground, like, and this is specifically that you want to be able to argue your disadvantages. But then you get to the last thing. And so see, I have three standards. You could triple up on the standards. That's totally fine. Okay. And then you have an impact where you say, so what's the impact of this? This is a voter. If you are not topical, that is your like primary burden on the affirmative that you have not met, and therefore you can vote for your opponent. Take a look at that. And see, look, I'm putting it next to in the second. You know what? I'm gonna actually I'm gonna freeze the first row so you can take a look. All right, so there's the substantial argument, and it's not in responding to any one thing in particular. Okay, so I put it in the second column. You can still do it first. You don't need to go from top to bottom when you're actually reading your notes. Okay, but it's like the reason why we do these next to each other is so we can compare arguments from left to right. But it's not necessarily the order that you have to deliver them in your speech. Okay, so that's we call these flow sheets, but I think it's much more appropriate to call them these spreadsheets now for debates, because we don't, if you're doing it on a spreadsheet, or at least the way I'm doing it right now, nice and easy, there's way more sophisticated ways to do this, is, you can move them around and things like that. And so it's awesome that way. Okay. So, this is just stuff that I'm kind of thinking about off the top of my head. But I'm wondering, what if I go just straight up, like why we shouldn't increase the number of green cards, and just like see what people are basically saying. Because there's a lot of people that want to get rid of it. Abolishing, okay. The green card lottery would harm U.S. workers. Okay, so there's, yeah, I'm not sure how much traction you'll get with that argument about, it's like, oh, well, they'll take our jobs, because there's a lot of the evidence that is already in the affirmative packet is how these people are taking, they're not taking American jobs, and they're, doing just, job market's doing good regardless of green cards. That green cards isn't a major effect on it. So merit-based system. Okay. And so, but you can find there's I found one opinion piece on it, but like that starts becoming a little, you got to find a little bit more sort of data-driven arguments. Yeah, it's kind of hard to come up with just the basics on why raising the in general would be. But I bet you anything, if you go to NFA-LD paperless debate, they might have some like, you got to kind of peruse through their submissions, and they might have some stuff, because this is I think this is a pretty topical case. I think it's pretty topical. Yeah. Anyways, if you got any other questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments, or if you got some other way of contacting me, go for that. Okay. Otherwise, those are a few ideas, but your research will probably yield even more if you do it, just a little bit more properly. Okay. All right, everyone. I hope that was helpful. I'll see you in the future.